The night the blackmail letter arrived, Clara Alvarez was at the podium finishing a speech about renewal, her hair pinned into the same severe knot she wore for votes and funerals. Cameras had the kindness not to catch the exact moment her smile thinned. The split second, a thought of the past folded her like paper. 20 years of carefully arranged truths had been stacked into the tableau she presented every campaign season. A childhood in public housing turned into scholarships, internships, a relentless climb through committee rooms and backroom compromises. She had become the safe, necessary face of change, the candidate who could promise the city stability while quietly strangling its worst excesses. The letter was plain, an envelope with one edge singed as if it had been hastily rescued from a flame. Inside, a Polaroid with a smudge of ash at its corner showed a warehouse in mid-smoke and a scrap of handwriting. "We remember." The note beneath it had just 3 lines. "I know what happened. Pay or I expose." Clara folded the paper without letting anyone see. She had buried this night like a body, in layers of new names and new appointments. But ash had a way of sneaking through the cracks. "I didn't mean for anyone to die," she thought, sharp, private, because saying it aloud would make it true for everyone. The memory came back in a sweep of heat. 20 years earlier, 19 and raging, Clara had stood with a group of students outside the old Miranda textile, a hulking carcass that stank of sour cotton and municipal regret. It was the kind of building the city pretended to forget, unregulated, useful for hidden labor and political favors. They had planned a protest, a symbolic blaze that would force the council to reckon with abandoned industrial blight. Someone had suggested breaking a warehouse window and lighting a trash heap in the loading dock. Someone else had joked about leaving a sign that read, "Burn the corruption." Clara had been the one to wedge the lighter into a sleeve and duck back into the darkness. She had not known that Mateo, the night janitor who came in early to sweep the loom dust, was in an upper office, keys jangling as he unlocked the storeroom. The fire spread faster than adolescent courage expected. Flames found a seam in the old insulation. Smoke tunneled up in secret. When they ran, someone had slammed the service door and bolted. Later, police would chalk the building, file their reports, and the city would hand a small envelope to the family. Mateo had died. She had told herself for years that she had only been a foolish witness to events she had not intended to cause. The truth, that she had struck the match and turned her back, sat like coal behind her ribs. The blackmailer, when they made contact, baptized every channel with economy. First, a gray envelope with ash, then an anonymous email with a single audio file. Her own laughter, recorded the night outside Miranda, muddled by static but unmistakable. The campaign's war room moved like a hand closing on a splinter, fast, antiseptic, trained. Lawyers recommended paying quietly. Advisors counseled stonewalling, and then leading with a preemptive narrative about youthful mistakes. "You can't pay," her campaign manager said, voice even as a metronome. "It becomes leverage forever. We fight it." But blackmail was not only about money. The notes contained facts that could be surgically combined with present-day policies to portray Clara as a hypocrite who had extinguished a life to get ahead. Mateo's sister lived in the very district Clara promised to protect. Developers who supported Clara's platform had ties to the company that owned Miranda. A paid whisper could detonate in a primary season like a firecracker in dry grass. Clara felt the air conditioner click and worried about the sound of her own breath. I had learned to manage risk like an engine. Misfires were unacceptable. Now the machine of her life had a loose spark, and a single anonymous hand held a tinderbox. Investigations produced little that comforted and much that unnerved. A private investigator traced the Polaroid paper to a convenience store near the Old South River, its CCTV grainy and useless. Someone in a hooded jacket had stood under sodium light and left. The audio file's metadata had been scrubbed, the money trail a dead end. Clara's name was clean in public records. Her fingerprints had not been on the lighter that had been recovered in a faded evidence bag. But clean did not mean unassailable. The blackmailer escalated by posting a short clip to a shadow account. Clara's silhouette, night wind pressing her hair, her hand lifting a small flame toward a heap of newspapers. It was enough for mouths to gossip and for the press to ping like startled birds. Calls came in. A former ally asked for a meeting. A donor wanted to hedge bets. Volunteers who had sung with them in smoky basements now avoided eye contact at canvassing rallies. People Clara trusted, men who had shared cigars and secrets at dinners designed to solidify power, began to thread their lips with a caution that smelled like distance. One of them, Carter Reed, a senator who had been mentor and friend, met her for coffee and offered a practiced sympathy. "You know how the game is played," he said gently. "You bury it carefully. We can make the problem go away." The implication was clear. I could buy silence if I wanted to, Clara thought. But buying silence was not the same as buying forgiveness. The blackmailer wanted more than money. Their terms came in a voicemail left on a burner phone, a voice low and precise. "Withdraw from the race. Push through the tenant's protection bill you promised, and make sure the developers lose zoning relief. Admit wrongdoing on camera." The list was a moral ledger cooked for maximum pain. Clara sat in the dim of her living room and listened to the message until it looped and felt like the ticking of a clock wound too tight. She could picture the person on the other end, faceless, patient, marinated in the kind of grievance that could calcify into a crusade. The campaign considered legal recourse. Detective Hargrove from the city force told Clara that blackmail cases were messy and public. "We can find them," he said, "but getting proof that would stick is another matter. Be careful who you trust." That advice itself was a trap. Suspicion ate at the team. Meetings were held in rooms where everyone wore armor of new phrases. At night, Clara dreamed of flames licking up a child's toy truck and waking to the taste of smoke on her tongue. She had risen on talk of making the city safer, on promises to remove the things that turned neighborhoods into no man's lands. If she folded now, she would hand her life's work to fear. If she fought, the wounds from 2 decades ago might be pulled open on every midnight broadcast. The week before the primary, Clara chose confrontation over capitulation. She arranged to meet the blackmailer, anonymously, at the ruins of Miranda when the river fog made faces indistinct. It was a foolish decision and a simple one. If you were going to stop a person who thrived on leverage, you had to take the leverage back and decide the terms. She arrived with nothing in her pockets and everything on her back. A candidness rehearsed until her voice didn't shake, a camera crew hidden in the hedgerow, and a small recorder in her palm. The person who stepped from the shadow was not a hooded stranger, but Emilia Ramos, Mateo's younger sister, careful and channeling grief into something sharp and purposeful. She had not wanted money, Emilia said. She had wanted an acknowledgement that Mateo's life had been stolen, not excused. "You lit the flame, Senator," Emilia said, each syllable measured as if weighing the worth of a verdict. "You ran. I watched you run for 20 years while my brother's room stayed empty." There was no triumph in her face, only the cold architecture of a long plan. Clara could have pretended ignorance. She could have lied. Instead, the confession she had held private for 2 decades came out like a cough she could not stifle. "I struck the match," she said, her own voice strange and small in the wide, ruined yard. "I didn't know he was inside." Emilia's hands trembled and then steadied. "Then let the city know," she said. "Let the record be right." The release was a ferocious thing. Clara stood before microphones 3 days later and told the story with the same blunt economy she used to craft policy statements. She spoke of youthful fury and the miscalculation that had killed a man, of running from the consequence because, in those years, escape was how you survived. She apologized to Mateo's family in a voice that broke the lines of political speaking into something honest and unadorned. Television replayed the Polaroid, her laughter from 2 decades ago threaded with the sound of her admission. Supporters left like tidewater receding. Some volunteers hung signs with a new private shame. Donors who had once liked her pragmatism offered statements about how difficult decisions sometimes had to be made. But confession also transformed the calculus of the city. An independent investigation opened, not to manufacture scandal, but to search for truth. People who had been complicit in the old arrangements were called to account. The Tenants' Protection Bill moved forward with renewed urgency and a moral clarity that surprised her. Emilia did not appear to gloat. She attended the hearings and sometimes sat in the back, quiet as ash. In speaking, Clara had not ignited forgiveness, but she had shifted something, the narrative from concealment to consequence. Power, she learned, could be surrendered to make room for repair, and silence could be exchanged for accountability. When the dust settled, Clara's political ascent had the contours of a different life. She lost the primary by a narrow margin and watched, with a strange mixture of grief and relief, as another face took the city podium. People called her brave. Others called her naive. The Miranda site was dedicated as a memorial to Mateo and the invisible laborers whose lives had been dissolved in municipal indifference. Clara spent weeks sitting on the memorial's cold stone and watching pigeons rearrange the ash like accidental calligraphy, thinking about the peculiar arithmetic of ambition. What one gains, what one burns, what remains. Emilia sent a single letter after the hearings, brief and without flourish, an acknowledgement, not reconciliation. In the silence that followed, Clara understood that the match she had struck had never been about heat, but about the small, predictable choices that build a life. I had wanted power like a thing to be hoarded, she realized. But power needed tending, not hiding. In that understanding, there was a kind of exile and a fragile freedom. The city's lights cooled overnight. From the distance of her apartment, she could see the memorial's plaque reflecting a street lamp. The ember of her old ambition smoldered, reshaped now into vigilance instead of hunger. She had walked through fire and come out ash-covered, but honest. And though what she had been seeking had burned away, what remained had the slow, steady possibility of repair.